we're living in a world of anti-truth. We're living in a world of anti-science. We're living in a world that's increasingly anti-intellectual, anti-reason. So, so maybe speak to the importance, even the greater importance, of connecting to people where they are and how they look at the world, given that overriding phenomenon that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and this is increasingly a difficult issue, and one that I've puzzled over so much. How do we valorize truth in a world that has determined that truth is completely relative? This is much further than postmodern theory would ever take this larger idea, where we are today, where truth can be whatever you think it to be in that moment, and people stand up to support their ideological positions as though they were true. I think getting back to our core faith values and lifting this up, all of our faith traditions are built around a premise of some sense of truth in a less subjective way. And though I would always wrestle with notions of objective truth, I would say that at least having a conversation within the context of faith community does provide for a different set of norms, a different set of values. If we can utilize a commonplace like the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, the Quran, as a basis of collective truth, and utilize that to frame the conversations we have, then hopefully we can begin to counter the tide of ideas that are, in essence, the manufactured propaganda of partisan politics. If we're able to tie what we're doing to these greater sense of values that resonate in the hearts and souls of people, I think we're better able to do that. But let me move away from just talking about faith community to talking about American identity again as well, because I think that our American identity has been compromised by this the relativation of the relativization. I'm making up a new word here, but I have a PhD, so that's okay. The relativization of truth. But if we could return to talking about the commonplace of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and using them to frame what does our notion of truth look like there? What does our notion of a just democratic society look like there? And let's utilize such language when we engage in conversations to talk about how, contrary to the notion that Medicare for all is a socialist exterior idea that's thrust on us, it is an idea that resonates with the notion of commonwealth. We are people who came together to promote the commonwealth. This is an expression of ensuring that our neighbors are able to gain access to the same mode of healthcare that we have. I think we need to better utilize our collective commonplaces, be it faith-based or be it national-based, nation-based, patriotic core principles and values. We need to make better use of them if we're to counter this sort of tide of propaganda masquerading as truth.
And then last question I'm going to ask, and we can open it up. Maybe Mike, if you can tease out a couple questions that are kind of repeating in the chat. But one of the responses of faith communities that's problematic to some degree, but understanding what it is, Mike actually came up with this question, which is the propensity toward charity, and also the phenomenon of philanthropy in our society. That, you know, somebody rich will take care of my problems, or this faith community will take care of my problems, but then we're just perpetuating the system, right?
Amen. Amen. I think we are 100% in need of moving from charity modes of responses towards something different. And I don't want to ever cast aspersions on charity models. of responding to people's needs. A charity response to homelessness is we have a program called Room at the Inn where you can spend the night in the church if you're without a home. A charity response to foodlessness. In Charlotte, we have something called Loaves and Fishes, or we have food banks where we give people access to food to help them through their needs. And these are wonderful responses necessary to help people through difficult crisis moments. But the larger point is, instead of Room at the Inn just saying, we've got a place for you to stay tonight, the Room at the Inn should be asking, why is it that people that work full-time can't afford an adequate place to live? Instead of just saying that we're going to give you 2 weeks food with loaves and fishes, and then you can come back in 3 weeks for another 2 weeks supply of food, which is necessary. What if we said, why is it that people that are working full-time jobs or forced into part-time labor can't afford to get adequate food for themselves? What we'll end up finding if we start to ask these kinds of questions is that the problems that we see with poverty, the problems that we see with a lack of access to healthcare, the problems that we see with so many things in our society have less to do with individuals who are broken and more to do with a system that is broken. In essence, what I'm saying is we don't need a charity response. We need a justice response. We need a response that challenges the overall system. We need a response that begins to suggest that the way that we do things has benefited a small handful of people at the expense of so many others. We need to look at the way that privilege has given great advantage to some at the expense of others who've been left out to suffer, left out to struggle, been forced to deal without. I often tell the story of my daughter's school and how I used to go to school in the morning, drive her to school in the morning to drop her off, and I'd get in that line. And the line was two ways, go in this way, come out the other way. And as we would get in the line, since there were fewer people coming out, every once in a while, somebody would cut out of the line and they'd go forward and then they'd get in the line in front of you. And what that showed is that every time somebody came out and took an advantage, they put the rest of us at a disadvantage. And what that showed me is that always when we give people privilege in a system, we privilege the top 1%, the top 5%. We privilege those people who have health insurance and against those who don't, and utilize that privilege as a way of helping mobilize them against a larger healthcare system. Whenever we have privilege in the system, it comes at the expense of someone else. It costs someone else. We don't just need to do charity responses to care for those who are left out. We need to begin to change the overall system to make it more just, more fair, more equitable. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 20, justice, only justice shall we pursue. And we need to be about that as systems, as people within broken systems, I should say. And let me come clean and confess. Systems aren't broken. The systems that we have are working just the way they were intended to work. The people that are left out are the people that we intended to leave behind. The people that are benefiting are those that we intended to lift up in the system. We have to recognize that the system is working the way it was intended to work, but that fundamentally is wrong. So we need to, and this is why I call the project that we've been working on here in Charlotte, Reimagining America. We need to begin to reimagine our overall systems, to think about what it would look like if it was just, and then work to manifest that in the larger world. That will help us with healthcare, that will help us with education, that will help us with voting rights, that will help us across the board. Reimagining and recreating a more just, more fair, more equitable system, instead of just providing the Band-Aids, necessary, however they may be, that charity responses provide.
Dr. Bill.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much, Dr. Sadler. So great to see you and hear you, as always, feeling inspired as a result. I just brought up in the chat about the example in history of the pastor, the rather famous pastor in our movement, Tommy Douglas in Canada, who of course led the movement coming out of the Great Depression in rural Saskatchewan. and had a way, I think, of speaking, one-on-one with folks in their homes, at the kitchen tables, those kinds of discussions that led their movement. And I think it's not a fluke of history that it happened that way. And Tommy was, I think, particularly fond of talking about the multi-tier, the inequity and injustice in healthcare. So I'm thinking from your perspective, do you see something like that as perhaps what would make our movement actually achieve the justice that we're all looking for?
I love that notion of beginning that face-to-face, one-on-one relational kind of work. And I think that if we're to be successful as a movement, it often comes at that expense. I want to lift up just someone that we've talked to today. And Dr. Bill, it's always great to be in conversation with you because you live this out each and every day. One of the reasons that Joel Siegel has been such a successful organizer over the years is because he's a man who loves to have those one-on-one conversations. I've seen him in public spaces just sort of walk up to people, start conversations with people who are behind counters and say, how are you doing with your healthcare? Really? What would be a better healthcare system for you? Huh? Really? What if we were able to tell you that there's a strategy in place to put something like what you talked about in place? Would you be willing to come to a meeting and talk a little bit about that? I think we need to be able to have that sort of ability to engage with those who may be interested in the work that we're doing, but have never been invited in and never realized the power that they have to effectuate change in the larger system. And we need to help people to realize that, give them a sense of their own empowerment. And we're not empowering them, but we're just letting them know you do have that power. You do have the ability to make the kinds of changes that you'd like to see. If the more we're able to do those kinds of things, engage people, share with them the vision that animates us, that motivates us, and invite them to come in. One of the other things I'm going to say is whenever we bring people into the larger movement, we've got to give them something to do. It's not, people don't want to come and just sort of sit in meetings and listen to talking heads talk. They want to do something. So give them something to do. Why don't you send out letters to the people in your neighborhood? Why don't you go with us when we will meet with our Congress members? Why don't you just talk to your family members over Thanksgiving? And here's something you might say. This is a brochure of a few points, talking points that you might like to bring up with members of your family as you go. We need to begin to do more of that if we're going to amplify the power of this movement. Storytelling is significant. And in essence, what we're trying to do, all of what we're trying to do now, is we're trying to tell a different story. We're trying to bring us all into a different narrative. And the narrative that we create together is one that will be better than the one that exists right now. So how do we tell that better story? And how do we bring people in to buy into that better story so that we can help to bring about a better world?